Let me. Great. Is the presentation visible?
It is indeed. Yep.
Okay, great. So hello from the US. I'm Dan Kirshner. I'm a senior software developer at George Washington University Libraries in Washington, DC. I also happen to be a graduate student in health and biomedical data science for additional context. So I'm very pleased to be here. So thanks for inviting me. I really believe, and I know that this group agrees, that with so much of the web experience and content today being centered around social media, and Kirsty mentioned that as an example, it's important that our conversations around archiving and presentation should include the tools and workflows for social media content. So after me, Carl's going to speak about Instaloader, so I'm interested to learn about that as well. What I'm going to show you is Social Feed Manager, which is a tool for capture specifically designed for social media, and show you the workflow that it's situated in, at least at our institution. So hopefully today we can collaborate a little bit about other workflows it could fit into. So tell you a little bit about it. I'm going to try to do like a circus act, like a live demonstration, and put it in the context again of the workflows. So all right, so we affectionately call it SFM, so I'm going to use that term. SFM is open source software that we've developed at GW for building collections of social media data. So although I am also a lover of the command line, the point of Social Feed Manager was to bring the ability to the user through a user interface. So it's a web application, and we open it up to all kinds of users at our institution. And I'll tell you in a moment, it's deployed at other institutions as well. While most people these days are interested in Twitter of the choices here, it is also capable of collecting from a few other platforms, Tumblr, Flickr, Weibo. It's an application that typically like a library or archives would run, not only to make their own collections, but to make it available to their users. Those might be researchers, students, other librarians and archivists, et cetera. So it's, as an example, here are some institutions, at least in the US, that are currently or have used Social Feed Manager. We know also we've had actually contributions to our open source project from some users in Europe that are using it for projects there. So, and some national libraries as well. Okay, so let's, oops, I think I skipped it. Yeah, here we go. So when I say that I want to just compare and contrast a little to the more typical web capture. So I like to think of it that web capture captures a user experience because, which is a combination of both the content of the page and the presentation. Whereas with social media capture, let's say via the API, because you can of course crawl the web rendering of a social media account, let's say, you'll get data often that is like metadata that's part of the post that may not be rendered on the web page. So that's one difference. And you get it in a structured format, which for our users, which are often researchers, that makes it much easier for analyzing. So the native format with many of these platforms, and Twitter included, is usually JSON, but you can derive simpler derivatives from that, which might be CSV, Excel, et cetera. Another advantage of using an API is that you can specifically ask through the API methods that they make available for subsets of interest that you can't necessarily get through a web capture. When we talk about web capturing, the seeds or units that we tend to talk about are a site or a page, whereas with social media capture, we're talking about posts and perhaps all the posts on an account, something like that. We did, I think in the last presentation, there was an allusion, or maybe it was in the comments, about sites that ask for credentials, whereas with using an API, it almost always requires credentials. So there are some differences there. Just as an example, this is the rendering of a post on Twitter, which you can see there's some metadata, like the number of retweets and likes and the date and the text and things like that. But if we look at the same post as we might capture it through the API, we get that metadata plus much more. So there's information that's not visible in the web. It's structured, so we can do things with it in terms of analysis. And notice that it's separated from the way that it's presented. So that might be an area where you could complement the two types of capture, where you're doing social media capture. And if it's important to your objective, you could also complement that with a web capture of the account as well. So let's talk more specifically about using SFM for social media capture. So Social Feed Manager uses the free standard APIs offered by the platform. So we're not doing any scraping, although I do have to say that one of our contributors from, I think in Germany, actually offered up through a GitHub pull request a Facebook scraper that they offered that plugs into SFM. So it can incorporate harvesters that do scraping, but we're still working on incorporating that pull request. So one of the other factors in using an API is what you get back is limited to what the platform will give you. So as an example, if you ask for all the posts on an account in Twitter, they'll give you the most recent 3,200, but not more. Whereas perhaps with web scraping, you might be able to get more than that. In terms of how we store the content, we actually have adopted the work paradigm, which has been mentioned already today. So, normally when you're doing web capture, you make a HTTP request for a page and you get back the HTML, and that's stored in the work file along with the headers, et cetera. It's very similar. We're just making a request. Instead of getting back HTML, we're getting back JSON. I want to point out another tool that's wrapped inside SFM for Twitter capture, Twerk, which doesn't really have like a user interface beyond the command line, but part of what we do is we're wrapping that in a nice user interface. We're not currently capturing media like pictures and videos. We did in the past with Heritrix. It got a little problematic, but in terms of space. But the posts usually include a link that allow you to download the posts if the user wants to, who's extracting the content. And we handle all the rate limiting, et cetera, to sort of play nice with the APIs. Okay, so again, we're talking about trying to archive lots of individual posts, but most people that use the content that we have are not as interested in the works as they are with either the JSON for more the computer science types, or for the other 80% of our users, they're interested in the derivatives. So like the CSV, et cetera. So then in terms of archiving and preservation, the question is, what do we preserve? Do we preserve the works? Does anyone really care about that provenance information that's included in the headers? Or do we just preserve the JSON, or maybe even less than that, the CSV that's extracted than that? So that's a conversation there. And when I talk about the CSV extract from the JSON, we've kind of flattened each post out into one row. And this is an incredibly useful format for people who are doing research on the content. So you can see the text and number of likes and hashtags and of course the links to the media. So if you want to kind of scroll through and grab all the images. So the excuse me, I got a little bit of a cold today. Let me just tell you about where Social Feed Manager fits in our workflows. So I've given the example of collecting from Twitter. The thick lines indicate full Twitter data. The developer guidelines limit you from, when you're using the API, from sharing the full data beyond your institution. So within our institution, we can have our users extract the entire text of the tweets and all that information. But we actually have a second application called Tweet Sets, which we make available beyond GW. So SFM sits inside the intranet. Tweet Sets is on the outside, but it actually looks at the IP address of users and provides people inside GW with, again, the ability to derive full data versus people outside who can only derive the just identifiers of the tweets in a collection. We also take some of those collections and put them on Harvard Dataverse and in the form of just the identifiers of the tweets. And those collections actually are minted DOIs over there, and we get citations for the collections like that. So it's kind of nice. Okay, so let me just switch over to the live walkthrough. Just trying to keep an eye on the time here. So let me switch over to the, here we go. All right, so this is it. I'm going to spare you some of the details that I usually like to show in the interest of time. So I'm going to be super meta here, and I'm going to create a collection set about digital preservation on Twitter. Preservation on Twitter. Okay. So within there, I'm going to create two collections. I'm going to create one that collects from specific accounts. We'll say DigiPres accounts, and using my Twitter credential because we have to collect, essentially log in. And the seeds in this case, as opposed to web archiving, are going to be accounts. So as some examples, I'll collect from DPC_chat. These are Twitter accounts, DRI Ireland, Net Preserve. And let's just leave it at that for now. We can always add more later. And I just set it going. And now it's off and running in the background. In just a few minutes, it'll return with the tweets. And then we can also set up a collection that is focused more on hashtags about digital collection, digital preservation. So, we might create seeds to collect all tweets mentioning hashtag DigiPres, digital preservation, AVPres, etc. And then we just set that one going. So if we go back to our hashtags account, we'll see that, oh, I'm sorry, this is the wrong one here. The accounts, we see that we already have 9,700 and so tweets. We can export that into a variety of formats. So in the interest of time, you can take my word for it. And it derives from the works that it collected. It spins through, pulls out the JSON, and then derives the Excel, CSV, or whatever we ask for. So let me just hop back to the slides here for a second. Okay, so the in closing here, I want to leave you that we have a project site that you can go to. So we have a GitHub site that you can contribute to. We have a good documentation site, and the main project site is over here. I'll try to drop these links in the chat after I finish speaking here. And in closing here, I just look forward to working with you later today if we want to talk about how to incorporate more of an archiving perspective. We don't, we haven't really thrown out any of the collections that we've collected as librarians on the server. We do periodically, clean up for collections that some of our users who have graduated as students collect, but SFM is certainly amenable to and can fit into more of an archiving and preservation workflow. Thanks very much.